If you're the kind of stacker who once in a while has to kind of maybe hide your most recent purchase, you didn't really have permission to make it, maybe you try to sneak it into the house, imagine for a second if there was a holiday or a holiday season where you had kind of carte blanche, a free for all, where you could buy any precious metals you wanted to. In fact, the entire family would celebrate it as on an auspicious thing and something that would bring good luck to the family. Wouldn't that be fun? In fact, there is such a holiday season, and it's celebrated by as many as 2 billion people around the world. And that's what this video is going to be about. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dubsy. Namaskar, I want to thank you for being with me here today. If you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you guys as always. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about the celebration of lights called Diwali or Diwali, depending on where you're from. And we're going to talk about just how significant precious metals are in that holiday season. If you're new to the channel, I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I like to begin my videos where I can with a definition or two that we can kind of work back into the subject. But the subject of this video is really all about Diwali or Diwali, however you want to pronounce it. This Hindu, or originating in Hindu faith, festival of lights, and just how significant it's become globally. We're going to talk about a lot of that. Well, let's take a deeper dive into what the holiday actually means. We're going to talk about a little bit about Indian culture and the importance of the significance of precious metals within that culture. We're going to look at some of these amazing pieces, some of these going back 300 or 400 years. And we're going to wrap it up with some ideas. So I want to thank you once again for being with me. What is Diwali or Diwali? What is it? It's a festival of lights that really finds its roots going back at least 1,500 years, probably elements going back even further than that. And it's really symbolizing the spiritual victory of lightness over dark. You're going to hear elements that may remind you, my American subscribers, some of our holidays, because there are bits and pieces that really get very, very similar to this festival that's held literally around the world now. It's slightly different forms. It's celebrated by folks who are Hindus, but also people that are Sikhs and Jains, and also some Buddhists celebrate this. And while it originally kind of originated in the Indian subcontinent because of the diaspora, Indians moving all throughout the world, it's actually become an important holiday, not just in India, but in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, places like Canada, the UK, Thailand, Australia, lots of countries around the world. Like I said, somewhere around 2 billion people in the world celebrate this. Celebrants decorate their homes and workplaces with traditionally oil lamps to dispel darkness. And there are feasts, there's fireworks, there's parades. So it's kind of like in America, our Thanksgiving and maybe Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's all wrapped up into one. But you also throw in just a little bit of Black Friday, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. It's traditionally 5 or 6 days this year as you're watching this. It's between October 28th and November 3rd. Again, it's probably finds its roots in harvest festivals, and if you think about the American Thanksgiving, not completely dissimilar, right? This is a period of time where the crops are finally in. You're not working in the field from sun up to sundown. You finally get to relax just a little bit, celebrate, the abundance that you've been able to grow throughout the year, knowing that you're going into the dark season with at least a little bit of food to eat. You're going to have a big celebration. You're going to have a huge dinner. You're going to invite friends and family, maybe give a few gifts here and there. So it's really kind of similar to that, but there's so many different elements that have gone into this over the years. It's really interesting to try to pick apart, especially looking at it from a Western point of view, from somebody who's never really experienced it before. Again, elements date back about 1,500 years at least. There's probably other parts of it that go back even further than that. And European travelers remarked on this celebration going back to the 1300s, 1400s. So we know going back, hundreds and hundreds of years at a minimum, that it resembled very similar to the celebrations that happen to this day. You celebrate, and my Indian compatriots out there can correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of clean and spruce up your house. Think of decking the halls with boughs of holly, kind of the same thing. You're getting the house prepared for friends and family to come over for big parties and feasts. You might do a little bit of upgrades to the house, maybe fresh paint, that kind of a thing. And then you're also decorating with oil lamps. Those are called dayas or sakis. Some people make colorful pictures on flat surfaces. These are made with really beautifully colored sand grains and other things that are kind of similar to that. Those are called rangoli. And you wear your best clothes, you light fireworks. Again, you have feast with friends and family. It's kind of a homecoming, so folks who are maybe overseas might come back home to see their family once again. So yeah, it's very similar in a lot of ways to Thanksgiving. The interesting thing about it, at least from my perspective, is that there is also a major shopping day smack dab in the middle of it, and that's called Dhanteras. And on Dhanteras, it's considered auspicious to make major purchases. So I liken that to Black Friday a little bit. This is when you would buy maybe major appliances for the home or home improvements. You're maybe buying a new set of clothes to wear, kind of bigger ticket things that you wouldn't buy throughout the rest of the year. But you also buy precious metals. And that's what's really fascinating about this. I don't want to paint all of the Indian subcontinent with one broad brush. You're talking about 1.5 billion people here, but gold and precious metals have really always been central to a lot of Indian identity. It's part of their culture in a way that maybe it's not for a lot of other cultures. It's almost like they were the original stackers. If you're one of my American subscribers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is part of their identity of who they are. So we definitely feel kind of a brotherhood with folks who are like that. Part of it is a nod to the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, who is the goddess of wealth and prosperity. There's also maybe elements of Ganapati or Ganesh, the elephant god, who is a remover of obstacles and kind of good fortune. So you can see that these icons kind of play out throughout the celebrations. But again, this has become such a broad thing that it's celebrated by all sorts of people around the world and all sorts of different faiths and tradition. It's really just a chance to get together and celebrate light over dark, right? The good things over the bad things. That's kind of how I see it, at least. According to tradition, and the reason why gold plays kind of a central role in this, there was a traditional king called King Hema or Haima, who had a son who was going to be bitten by a huge snake. And that snake was almost kind of hypnotized by a big pile of gold by the king's front steps. So you can see that buying gold in this period of time is almost seen as that part of that tradition where you're embracing good luck and dispelling bad luck, right? It's a way to kind of experience precious metals and have a little bit more meaning to them. I think that's a lot of fun. It's believed that if you're buying gold specifically on Dhanteras, that you get prosperity and good luck for the rest of the year. How much fun is that, right? Don't you wish we had that holiday here in the US? I think it's really neat. I mentioned Indian culture earlier and gold. Again, I'm not trying to paint all Indians or people of Indian heritage as having the same ideas, but I think that there really are elements of precious metals, no pun intended, that are central to a lot of Indian self-view, right? This is kind of how they see themselves. Gold ownership has always been important to Indian culture. There is a holy trinity in the Hindu faith, with one of those gods being Brahma, and Brahma is born of gold. So this is something that's always been part of kind of the Hindu faith, and they are kind of in lockstep with Indian identity to a large degree. Gold has always been popular as a gift for weddings or special occasions in India. And I was doing a lot of research when I was thinking about these pieces, and we'll talk about some of these beautiful items that you see here before you as we get a little bit further into this. According to the May 2024 issue of the Bangladesh Daily Sun, and I'll just read this quote to you: "Regardless of how subtle or extravagant a wedding is, every Indian wedding custom has its roots firmly planted in gold. And no Indian wedding is complete without the gift of gold, be it elaborate bridal jewelry or a simple gold bar." Man, what I wouldn't have given to have a simple gold bar as one of my wedding presents. So this is something that's kind of central to the idea of Indian identity. It's kind of neat, right? The World Gold Council says that Indian households, now I want to underscore this, Indian households, we're not talking about the Indian government. Indian households, private Indians, own over 20,000 metric tons of gold. That's a phenomenal amount. In fact, the Oxford Gold Group says 11% of all the gold in the world is owned by Indian households. Again, not the Indian government. This is just private Indians. That amount is reportedly more than the entire reserves of the United States, the International Monetary Fund, Switzerland, and Germany combined. This is an enormous amount of privately held gold, right? You can definitely see how important gold is, how significant it is to Indian households. Gold jewelry has always been part of Diwali or Diwali. It's also called Deepavali. So there are different words that are used depending on what group you are that's using the word. But in the last 50 years, I think that there's been, at least my perception, a little bit of a move from the traditional gold, which was often jewelry. And I've mentioned it before. If in the Indian subcontinent, 24 karat gold jewelry is not at all unusual. This is my 24 karat gold necklace. No, 24 karat gold is not too soft to make jewelry out of. In fact, this is the standard that's used in almost all of the Indian subcontinent, but also much of Asia and lots of the Middle East. Maybe they go down to 22 karat gold or 23 karat gold. 24 karat gold is not at all unusual. This is a 5 troy ounce gold necklace made out of 24 karat gold. I've worn this every day for the last 6 years, and no, it is definitely not too soft. So I think as I've been experiencing this, and I've seen it from afar, and I've noticed it over the years, there's been maybe a little bit of a pullback from the traditional Indian gold jewelry that is given and bought and sold in Diwali. To more of a move towards bullion pieces, and that's why we've got these pieces here. We'll talk about these a little later. I think there is a tradition of, and we talked about it being given in weddings, there's a tradition almost of women being responsible for the stewardship of the gold holdings of an Indian family. Now, Indian men wear a lot of gold jewelry also, and Indian men also can have gold and silver bullion. It's certainly not limited to a sex, but I think historically the women had kind of dominion over those gold reserves of the individual families. They kind of watched over it. When it was necessary, they had it available. And I think a lot of cases, this was kind of handed down from women to women. So great-grandmother to grandmother to mother to daughter over time. So if you've ever seen pictures of Indian weddings, especially families that have a little bit of money, the brides are often decked out in tens and dozens of troy ounces of pure gold jewelry in the form of beautiful bangles and necklaces and earrings and chains and everything else you can imagine. So I think this has always kind of provided women with a little bit of security, right? Not just for their family, but also for themselves, to know that they have kind of control over this part of the family's finances and they get to watch over it. I think it's probably a good thing. This is really neat. And this is some of the driving force behind this ownership of gold that's so important and central to a lot of Indian identity in that way. But I think a lot of it's pulling away a little bit and going more towards bullion. So again, these pieces of jewelry that are seen almost as portable wealth, not something that you would wear every day. And it gets to be a little bit cumbersome when you've got to exchange, a ring or a bangle bracelet, rather than something that we think of, stackers, a little bit more logically in terms of troy ounces and conversion to dollars and that kind of thing. And we'll see that play out in just a second. As a matter of fact, even if you have never heard of this celebration, this festival season, that 2 billion people in the world celebrate, I guarantee you a lot of names that you are familiar with as a Western stacker, if you're an American or somebody in a Western country like I am, you've heard these names before. You'll immediately recognize them, and look just how they are chasing after these dollars that are being spent in Diwali. I've got a picture here of the Royal Mint. Now, this is the London Mint that makes Britannias and all of the Britannia-related pieces. This is an example of their Diwali pieces for this year. Certainly you've heard of that before. If you've never heard of that, how about Pamp Swiss? Pamp is making gold and silver items. This is an example of what their offerings are for Diwali. Asahi is a very popular bullion brand in America for silver bullion. And Asahi also has Diwali offerings. This is what they're offering this year. The Royal Canadian Mint has got pieces. The Perth Mint. Now, there are large number of Indians living in lots of the British former colonies. Obviously, India was part of the British Empire. So there are Diwali pieces that are being offered by the Royal Canadian Mint and the Perth Mint also offering these pieces. How cool is that? So you can see that this is definitely a global phenomenon, and this is something that these refineries that we are all intimately familiar with are definitely pursuing. They're chasing after. That's how big this market is. And I think it's really neat. I've got some pieces that kind of take us back to where it really began in a lot of ways, and I've got some exciting, interesting pieces of modern but still vintage Indian gold and silver we'll take a look at. Maybe these are interesting ideas for Diwali, or maybe you're just interested in adding these pieces to your stack. So much history, and this is a really fun thing. Much of this history of precious metals in India begins with the rupee. There are some scholars who believe that the rupee, which is a silver coin, really has its roots going back as far as 500 BC and maybe a little bit before that. That takes us back to the dawn of coinage. If you've seen the Lydian pieces from about 600, 650 BC, these pieces not too far off from it. Now, these are a little bit more modern pieces, but the design and style hasn't changed that much in those millennia since these were first released. About 1540, the Sultan of Hindustan set the weight for these silver coins at 11.53 grams, or 178 grains. I don't use grains very often, but it's a legitimate way of measuring precious metals and has been for millennia. These are interesting examples, and I've got this piece. This is from the princely states of Shah Alam II. Now, lots of India was divided into little tiny kingdoms and fiefdoms and sultanates over the centuries. This is a piece that dates from about the 1870s, and this is sometimes called a sun face rupee. You can see that sun there. Isn't that a beautiful design? These are really cool, thick, chunky little pieces here, and often use all sorts of beautiful different scripts on them. These devices actually do have very significant meanings, and if you can read them, you can decipher these pieces really easily. This is a piece that's from about the same period of time, maybe a little bit earlier. Just a really cool, chunky little piece of silver. So these pieces, nice and tight and compact as they are, remind me in some ways of the Mexican Libertad, the first series of Libertads. And I've talked about those a lot on my channel. One of the things that I like about them, one of my favorite silver stacking vehicles, is that they have a really tiny diameter, but they're thick. And you can feel that in your hand. When you feel one of these, it almost feels like a small bullet in your hand. It's definitely got some heft to it. It's kind of a neat thing to feel. So this was a type of coin that was used in India, pure silver, that was used for hundreds and hundreds of years. The designs changed a little bit over time, but really they stayed kind of this same style. Set in, I said the Sultanate of 1540 set that 11.53 grams or 178 grains. That's a rupee, or rupee. That is the traditional silver coin of the area of India. But there was another weight system that was used with precious metals in India, and that was called a tola. And tolas are still used to this day, tola, T-O-L-A. This is a kind of a traditional style weight that is very similar in weight to the rupee. Remember I said that that was set at 178 grains. The traditional weight of the tola, 179.66 grains. So you can see that it was quite similar in size and heft to the traditional rupee. It seems kind of strange that they wouldn't have made them the same, right? But who am I to judge? In 1833, the British that were ruling over India at the time set standards, and they standardized that tola to exactly 180 grains, which works out to be 3/8 of a troy ounce. I know this is one of the most difficult fractions that I have to work with, and for a lot of folks you would just say, well, that's about a half of a troy ounce. It doesn't really work out that way in my mind for some reason, but we'll talk about that here in a second. I've got some beautiful pieces. These are traditional silver bars made in India. These were made by a company called Manalal Chamanlal. They were of Bombay, which we now call Mumbai. These pieces probably date to the 1950s or 1960s. And for a while, pieces like this were incredibly hard to find in the United States. But because I think we've seen so many Indians coming to the US over the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of these pieces have started to surface. This piece, when I bought it originally, was a little bit tricky to find, but now if you look on eBay, you'll probably be able to find pieces just like this. Isn't that a beautiful design for a piece that dates back probably 30, 40, maybe even a little bit more years than that? This is a 5 tola, and you can see that NGC has called it undated again, probably 1950s, 1960s. So thick that it reminds me of those rupees, right? It's just got that extra heft to it, that small size. And the reverse is really cool. You can see this beautiful aqua green toning around the outside. And there is the continent of India with these beautiful rays coming out. And I believe it says here 999 silver. So you can see that this has a lot of the same elements that we would expect on modern American silver bullion bars, but this maybe isn't quite the same. I mentioned that this is 5 tolas. That equals 1.875 troy ounces, so not quite 2 troy ounces. This piece is a 10 tola bar made by the same company, and you can see that it still says undated. This is the 10T 10 tola. It has a lot of the same characteristics. In fact, if we're looking at the reverse, they are virtually identical, right? Hopefully you can see that the glare is not too bad. Interestingly, though, while this piece has got beautiful designs on the obverse and reverse, the back of this one is just plain blank. And I mentioned before that while this is bullion, we would see this as bullion. I see this as bullion in the 21st century. It's plain as the nose on your face. These are silver bars. But it's my understanding that in India, these were almost kind of seen as place markers. So it wasn't really bullion. If you've ever tried to sell bullion back to a dealer before, you know that it can be a little bit of a complicated process. Sometimes, depending on the shape and the size of the bullion in the market, they may hem and haw a little bit. They may offer you something. These pieces were really kind of units of exchange. If I understand it correctly, a family may have a stack of these, and if you needed currency, you went to a participating bank and you just exchanged it for currency, kind of a no questions asked thing. And then when you had that money back again, you would just go buy it back, put it back in your stack, back in the closet or wherever you're holding it. So it was really kind of a very easy way to exchange physical silver for paper currency or whatever it was that you needed to spend. Kind of a neat idea, right? Clearly, they have a much more sophisticated idea of the way that bullion works, and I think we could probably learn something from them. I think that's a really neat concept. So the 5 and the 10 tola bars, I mentioned this one was a 10 tola. That means this is 3.75 troy ounces exactly. So we see that the way that these work at 3/8 of a troy ounce actually does come in handy when you get to the larger sizes. But you're still dealing with fractions, 3.75 troy ounces. Interesting thing about these pieces. I bought this piece originally many years ago, and this piece relatively recently, in the last 3 years, I believe. If you've seen my channel before, you've probably seen my videos about the Lydian hoard and the Springfield hoard. These are hoards of vintage silver bars from the 1970s, 1980s. And when I was first picking them up, I was in correspondence with NGC, trying to convince them to finally start slabbing or encasing silver pieces like this in these slabs, these holders. And by doing that, you can identify them. You can make sure that they are authentic. I thought it would be neat if they X-rayed them, or XRF'd them rather, to find out exactly what the purity of it was, what the weight of it was, and to have all that information included on the slab would be incredibly helpful. And they declined, and the reason that they declined after we'd had several conversations was that NGC doesn't slab silver bars. NGC certainly seems to slab some silver bars. So if you are a fan of collecting vintage silver bars, just think how cool this would be. Not every silver bar. You wouldn't want to do this necessarily for everything, but clearly there is a history of them doing that. They've done it before with other releases, special releases. The 911 recovery bars are some of the ones that PCGS has slabbed. It's time, NGC and PCGS. Let's see these vintage bars at least have the option of being slabbed and authenticated. I think it would be really cool. I've got one other example, actually, too. We'll talk about this one, though. First, this is, I mentioned these are Manalal Chamanlal bars. That's a private company. Lots of private mints all over India that were churning out these pieces to meet demand. Now, at this period of time, it's my understanding that Indians could own gold, right? We went through the whole thing with Executive Order 6102 in 1933, where it became much more difficult for Americans to own gold, with a few exceptions. Indians were suffering from kind of the same thing. Primarily, they weren't allowed to import gold into the country. All the gold that was there was supposed to be the gold that was already there. And clearly, India has a long history of having lots of gold. We talked about the amounts that they have currently. But it became incredibly valuable, therefore, to import gold into the country where there was a lockdown on it. You could purchase it inexpensively over the border, smuggle it into India, and then you could sell it for a pretty good amount of money. And this is an example of a gold tola. These are quite scarce. There are not a lot of these pieces. This one probably dates from the 1950s also, maybe 1960s, so roughly the same period as these silver bars. Isn't that a beautiful piece? I love that deer jumping over with the sun and the mountains in the background. This is just a really cool piece. I like to say that this back kind of reminds me of a pack of Lucky Strikes. There's something very mid-century about this 1950s looking, right? Isn't that cool? Fine gold, and they define fine gold here as 9950. So a little bit of a different, right? Instead of that millesimal 999 that we're used to, but it's really close, right? You're talking about thousandths of a percent or a percentage there. One tola pure gold, and it's signed Sham Lal Sen. That's the name of the company that made this. A beautiful piece. I picked this up in September of 2018. This was offered through Heritage. I know I talk about Heritage a lot. No, I don't get any kind of a kickback from them. I just thought it was so beautiful and so unusual. We don't see very many of these pieces. Not many pieces of these of this era survived. There are quarter tolas and half tolas. This is a full tola here. And I've seen pieces as much as 5 tola. That gets to be a great big gold coin about the size of a $20 gold piece, but all of them are quite scarce. But the design of this one was so beautiful. I put in what I thought was a pretty significant bid, and lo and behold, I snapped this one up. I paid $420 for it, September of 2018, and with the juice, with the buyer's premium, $504 out the door. Couldn't have been happier with it. When I got it, I was doing research about this, and this is really kind of funny. This company, Shamlal Sen, was raided, and all of their gold was confiscated. Now, at the time, they had in their inventory 502 of these pieces that I believe to be, if not this exact style, then very close to it. And they had another probably 70 pieces that had slightly different styles than this. But the people that had raided it, the police accused them of having smuggled all the gold that was contained in these pieces from across India's borders. And there was a big lawsuit that happened, and there was 2 court cases involved with it. And I'm doing all this research, trying to uncover exactly what's going on. They were accused of smuggling the gold and turning it into these native pieces, these pieces that look like they were supposed to be made in India. In fact, they were made in India, but they were made of smuggled gold. And eventually the case came down to the idea that once these pieces had been made, once the gold had been melted and poured and struck into these beautiful 1 tola pieces, it was impossible to tell where the gold came from. And that has always been the history of precious metals, right? Once you've got it melted down and poured into a different shape, you have no idea where it comes from. Now, maybe sophisticated X-ray spectrometers can tell slight variations, a little bit of an alloy or something like that that's contained that might give you some kind of an idea, but definitely back in the 1960s, the judges ruled that there was simply no way to determine where that gold came from. And all the gold was eventually returned to the folks who owned this, even though there was significant evidence to suggest that, yes, indeed, this gold had all been gotten from smuggling and turned into these pieces. So even though the prosecutors lost, they probably really did have a case for this company. Interesting, you're seeing a picture, at least, of the first page of this. Now, when I bought this piece, I thought it was really cool. It was going to be part of my permanent stack. This was a period when I had a little bit too much money and I was spending it on interesting gold pieces, and I got several in this auction. As soon as this auction closed, people started contacting me asking if they could buy this piece. If you didn't know, Heritage has a mechanism by which you can opt into receiving offers from private individuals once you buy something. They've got sophisticated records that track everything that you've purchased. And you don't have to accept it, right? You can actually opt into it or opt out of it to accept offers from individuals. Heritage gets a percentage, right? They're always going to get their cut no matter what. But it's an interesting way that you can buy something and instantaneously resell it and make a profit on it without having to really do anything. All of those pictures and images and copy and all that content is still right there. You just pick up your check. So when I bought this, I had no interest in doing that. And you're looking at it here. Originally in I want to say April of 2020, yeah, that's what it was. I was offered $750. Remember, I had just bought this piece for $500, $504. And I turned it down, wasn't interested in it. The people that had offered to buy that continued to hit me with offers consistently until February of 2021 when they offered me $1,550. And I finally reached out to Heritage and said, I'd never opted into this. I'm not interested in getting these offers. There is something kind of flattering, though, about getting an offer for 3 times what you had paid for something. Somebody else recognized that this piece was as beautiful and as scarce as I did, and they had to have it in their collection. But once it's in my hands, it doesn't really go anywhere, right? A beautiful piece. You can definitely see the significance of gold in Indian culture here when you're looking at things like Diwali or Diwali, and you start to know that this is really kind of an important celebration, an important holiday, and how significant precious metals play a role in this holiday period. Interesting, beautiful to think about. Now, gold has gone up significantly in price, and it's becoming more and more difficult, I think, for a lot of families to buy. So I think that there has definitely been a shift to silver pieces. And this is the last piece I wanted to share with you, and we'll talk about this piece in an upcoming video along with one of its older brothers. But this is the kind of piece that you might see in a modern Diwali or Diwali celebration. This is a tiny little 5-gram piece, so it doesn't weigh very much, and you can see this is in a beautiful assay card. It's a really nicely made piece. This would be kind of, I think, a little bit more modern, traditional piece given around Diwali. If you've got the means, clearly you're still buying the nice big pieces of gold, but I think we're starting to see a little bit more silver come into the picture. Interesting. The entire idea of a holiday season that has as its core, at least some elements of its core, the idea of buying and holding precious metals because it will give you good luck in the future. How fun is that? If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about here, by all means, leave a question down below. I would love to hear your comments. If you are in India, and I know that channel has got a growing population of folks who are in India who are watching, feel free to leave a comment. I know my pronunciation is probably not the best, and if you've got information that contradicts anything I said, I'd love to hear it too. This is fascinating. If you've got suggestions for other videos or video series that you'd like to see me make, by all means leave those comments down below, and I'll see if I've got the examples and the knowledge to make a video or video series of that, and if I do, I'll give you a big shout out. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click on that subscription button, hit the notification button. I'd love to have you be part of this community. Remember, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe. It's just a way of showing support for the channel. And as always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.